Good evening to you and welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson in for Pat Doris. This week on our show, we've explained to you how Oregon has effectively criminalized severe mental illness, making it all but impossible for some people to get treatment unless they first commit a crime. Some of you have asked, if it's like this here, how's it any better anywhere else? That question leads us right to tonight's big story. To understand how Oregon's mental health care system is working or not working, I've talked with dozens of families over the last 2 years. And no one has a story quite like this one. A Portland family who's lived the process of trying to get treatment in 2 states and what that might tell us about the way forward. Jeff Rott and Kathy Shaughnessy reflect on more than 3 decades of marriage. Together they raised a son, now 29 years old.
He is the kindest, sweetest person.
They describe him as gentle.
We can't squash bugs in the house. We have to take him outside.
Which made his development of mental illness even more startling.
For us, it was just like, what do we do? It was completely blindsided, right? From the son that was studying for medical school to all of a sudden somebody who's starting to disconnect from reality.
Jeff and Kathy's son was diagnosed with schizophrenia. They asked not to name him as he's getting better with care. His symptoms of psychosis started when he was in college. He'd hear things, say people were spying on him. One night he walked from Portland to Newburgh on the highway.
Because they think there's nothing wrong with them, right? They think they're just fine.
Jeff and Kathy felt lucky. During some psychotic episodes, their son agreed to stay in the hospital.
He would get to the ER. He would hopefully say the magic words, like, I'm thinking about killing myself. And they would put him into behavioral health, and then he would stay.
But if doctors decided he wasn't a danger to himself or others, and he turned down medication, by Oregon law, they couldn't force treatment. In 2019, Jeff and Kathy said a hospital released their son without warning, sending him on his way with a bus pass.
We had been there every day, his family, who were obviously going to be his caretakers, and they just let him go.
What happened next, they never expected.
We would track his phone. I woke up in the morning, looked at the map, and it was usually over here in Portland, and the map just slid over, and I was like, oh no, he was in New York. So you think about, was he dangerous to other people? He was in complete psychosis and got in an airplane. What do? He's in the city of millions and millions of people in psychosis, and he's in New York City knowing no one, with hallucinations that he's at Juilliard dance school, that he's a writer for Saturday Night Live, he's dating a supermodel who lives there. Luckily, they found him in New York.
Jeff and Kathy had called New York police. Officers found their son and took him to another hospital. He denied medication and treatment, but the New York facility held him anyway. When you saw how this process worked in New York compared to Oregon, what do you take away from that?
New York really cared about him. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it.
Jeff remembers a nurse.
And she just kept telling me, don't worry, we'll get him back. And, sorry.
The facility sent his son to mental health court, where lawyers and a judge discussed involuntary treatment.
And the judge would say, hey, if we give him this medication and give him time, is he going to return back to his normal life? And everybody said yes. And so the judge just said, he needs to take this medicine. 2 months after his son was admitted,
Jeff Rott walked in on one of his daily visits, expecting the usual.
He wouldn't recognize me as who I was, and I walked in, and he said, hey, Dad.
In New York, that system, that treatment worked.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
New York law doesn't require imminent danger for forced treatment, a high bar that can be difficult to reach. New York also has more than 2,500 civil beds. In contrast, Oregon's civil commitment law requires imminent danger for a person to meet the grave disability requirement. The state currently has less than 50 civil beds and stopped admitting almost any civil patients to the state hospital over the last 5 years. The result? People with severe mental illness too often only get treatment after they commit a crime that sends them to jail. It's a process that shocks acute care hospital leaders.
If we really are listening to what people need
in what is going to help them with their individual needs, we won't see people cycling back through an emergency room.
And family members who've experienced tragedy.
If he wasn't psychotic, he wouldn't have killed Teresa.
Oregon does recognize the problem. KGW's initial uncommitted reporting series in 2022 helped spark a Judicial Department work group that spent the last 2 years studying Oregon's civil commitment laws. Heavy hitters like judges, advocates, and policymakers will recommend changes in June. Oregon lawmakers just approved $85 million to expand mental health and substance use facilities across the state. But based on current need, that's just a drop in the bucket. An Oregon Health Authority study found Oregon needs to add 3,000 residential treatment beds, or about 70% of its current capacity, over the next 5 years. That would cost an estimated $500 million, and it doesn't pay for running the facilities once the beds are available. Jeff Rott says he sees news stories where someone in a mental health crisis commits a serious crime.
And yet then the world will label that person a monster or this horrible piece of trash. And meanwhile, it could have been my son.
But he believes the way we currently do things in Oregon sets us up for failure.
We're the monsters. We didn't help this person. We, collectively we, didn't help this person who needed help.
We want to know, how do you feel about this story in Oregon's standard of care? Maybe you have an example of how the mental health care system in Oregon has failed you or a loved one. Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We're thankful for the messages we've received from you this week. We've heard from a few of you who've gone through similar situations. Thanks for sharing your stories with us. Earlier this week, we told you about Austin Graham, who killed his mother in a state of psychosis after his parents say they took every step they could to get him help, even guardianship. Last night, we talked about how difficult it is for people to get help through the hospital system. Kelly's family is going through a difficult situation with one of their family members. They wrote into us, "I'm beyond frustrated with the mental health system in the Portland area. To hear that another life was lost due to the lack of care is heartbreaking. No one should lose their life due to mental illness, whether it's their own or someone else's." Marla wrote, "The system doesn't care about people with mental illness and in fact would prefer they die versus being helped, and I'm not exaggerating." And Larry said, "One has to think if Oregon had more civil commitments, we might just have fewer homeless mentally ill people out there." Tomorrow on The Story, we spotlight one of the solutions that is improving an aspect of mental health care for people accused of a crime, a rapid fitness to proceed process being used in Washington County that provides quicker mental health evaluations to people waiting in jail. Why leaders say it's a win on all levels. And if you missed any of my previous Uncommitted coverage, you can catch up right now on KGW+. That's our free streaming app, available now on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. And if that doesn't work for you, we have a new landing page on our website where all of the published Uncommitted stories are featured. Just head to kgw.com/uncommitted or head to the KGW YouTube page and find the Uncommitted section. We're following up on a story we first brought to you on Tuesday about a homeless woman who is pregnant and struggling with addiction who went into labor in her tent. Tonight, Blair Best takes a look at the impact of our fentanyl crisis on newborns and how cases like this one seem to be on the rise.
It's a difficult story to tell.
On board, I have a 29-year-old female patient who is 32 weeks pregnant.
Homeless, addicted to fentanyl, and pregnant. A woman goes into labor on the streets of Southwest Portland, right across from a fire station.
No pain at this time. We did use fentanyl about an hour ago.
That chilling call came in 2 weeks ago. KGW met the woman at her tent this week. She did not want to share her story on camera, and her baby remains in the hospital.
It's tragic. As a pediatrician,
Dr. Dimitri Duchovny is the medical director of OHSU's neonatal intensive care unit.
So I take care of babies when they're born and they have exposure to opiates.
He says they're seeing an increase in the number of babies born addicted to fentanyl.
The use of fentanyl has increased quite a bit in pregnancy just in the last few years.
Doctors are still learning how to treat a newborn withdrawing from the drug.
Some of the things that we're seeing is around the withdrawal starting out early, like it starts almost right away and in the first 12 to 24 hours of life, versus some of the other opiates. We know it's a huge problem, and it's a huge problem for that person and not getting the necessary care that they're getting during their pregnancy.
The first responders were called to help the woman who went into labor in her tent numerous times, offering treatment and housing, but she declined those services.
Our outreach team has made contact with them.
A team of Multnomah County outreach workers continue to try and help her.
I think it highlights the complexity of what we're dealing with in our community. There's tons of folks in our community that need a higher level of support, but the way our system's set up and the way that it functions right now, it's individual's choice.
Leaving them with no other option than to keep trying.
We never know if it's going to be the first attempt or the 100th attempt. And if we don't provide that 100th attempt, we're never going to find out if that person is ready to receive care.
Blair joins us now. Blair, we've received a lot of questions around this from our viewers, and one that keeps coming up: could the state have intervened in this particular case during the pregnancy, even if the mother didn't want help?
Well, Evan, the Department of Human Services tells me that Oregon law prohibits them from intervening before the baby is born, only after and if it's reported to them. And I will add, first responders are required to report such cases. Only then could they step in.
In this case, the baby is still in the hospital. Blair, do we know what will happen next there?
It's still hard to say, but doctors tell me that babies withdrawing from fentanyl, they have to stay in the hospital much longer, sometimes up to a month before they're healthy enough to leave. And again, this is a problem that is relatively new that doctors are seeing, and they're still learning how to treat such cases like this.
Of course. And what about custody for the baby in this case or in cases like it?
Well, it's still unknown in this case, but what I can tell you is that we talked with the woman's partner yesterday, so the father of the baby, and he tells us this is not the first child they've had together on Portland streets, and the first child is being cared for by the grandmother, and he assumes that will be the case here.
Got it. Thank you, Blair, for your reporting. Still ahead, if you're not registered as a Democrat or a Republican in Oregon, you're going to have a much smaller ballot when the primary happens next month. We're explaining Oregon's closed primary and the ongoing effort to open it up to everyone when the story returns. Oregon's primary is less than a month away, and if you want to be able to vote in more of the races, you'll need to pick a political party by next week. That's because Oregon has closed primaries, which means you can only vote within the party you're registered with. Democrats can only pick Democratic candidates. Republicans can only pick Republican candidates, and neither can cross over and vote for the other party's nominees. And if you're an independent or registered with a minor party or a non-affiliated voter, you can only vote in the nonpartisan races. Oregon is one of 15 states that have closed or partially closed primaries. In some states, only one party has closed their primary. Under Oregon law, the parties could choose to have open primaries, but they haven't. There are arguments on both sides of keeping primaries closed. Supporters say registered party members are more invested in their candidates, and they worry that non-party members could try to sabotage the party by voting for a weaker candidate. Opponents say primaries should be open to everyone in a democracy, and that closed primaries produce more extreme candidates because they're only trying to appeal to their party's base. Right now, there's an ongoing effort to open up Oregon's primary. The group All Oregon Votes has been trying to get a ballot measure for several election cycles now. We talked with Michael Calcagno, one of the volunteers behind the effort here.
So closed primaries restrict voters from participating in that May election, which is a crucial stage of our democracy. Who we elect to lead us and the solutions that they bring forth to the public sphere, those are so important that all voters are heard. And in Oregon today, 2 out of every 3 elections, whether it's Congress or our state legislature, 2 out of every 3 elections, the winners are decided in the primary. And when we restrict voting rights for independent voters, we're basically saying, no thanks, you don't get to participate in this most important stage of voting, but you can participate in November.
The effort isn't going too well, though. Calcagno and All Oregon Votes say they aren't getting enough signatures to get on the ballot this year. They had the same problem in 2022, but they're planning to keep up the effort and try again in 2026. The last 2 times open primary measures did make it to the ballot, they failed in 2014 and 2008. But Oregon actually has a much larger number of independent and non-affiliated voters, and that's growing, than people registered to a party. So the biggest chunk of voters in the state will be left out of primary voting. As of this month, there are about 994,000 registered Democrats, or about 32% of voters. There's 722,000 Republicans, that's about 24% of voters. 1,110,000 people are non-affiliated voters, and 204,000 people are registered with minor parties. Altogether, 43% of voters in Oregon don't belong to a major party. Calcagno says open primaries would allow voters to look more critically at the candidate and not the party.
The great thing about open primaries is they don't tip the balance in favor of Republicans or in favor of Democrats. We know that independents are free thinkers. They are swing voters. They decide based on the person, not the party. And we know from a lot of studies that a majority of those independent voters truly do hold more progressive values that are reflective of the state. So in general, we're not going to be drastically changing the outcomes of elections. We're just going to be unshackling politicians from always preaching the party line and never reaching across the aisle. Our closed primary system rewards politicians who are there to score political points instead of who are there to solve real problems with solutions that are acceptable to both sides of the aisle.
Now, if you're not registered as a Democrat or a Republican, you'll still get on a ballot. Still get a ballot, that is. You just won't have a lot of those big races on there. If you do want to join one of those parties and vote in their primary, you have the chance until next Tuesday, the 30th, to do so. You can go online to oregonvotes.gov/register or go to your elections office. In the general election in November, you will still be able to vote for whichever party you like, of course, no matter your party registration. So what do you think about this? Should Oregon primaries be opened up to everyone, or are they better off staying closed for the reasons we shared earlier and only letting registered party members vote? Let us know what you think. The email address, of course, thestory@kgw.com, or leave us a voicemail 503-226-5090. Trees in Washington County are under attack by the invasive emerald ash borer. The bugs can destroy full-grown trees, but there's a way to slow them down. After the break, we explore with the Department of Forestry as they look for the trees they can save. The Northwest is known for its trees, and they're an important part of our ecosystem, but they're under threat from a beetle species described as the most destructive forest pest in the country. The invasive emerald ash borer is killing ash trees in Washington County, but there may be a solution. The cities of Forest Grove and Cornelius are trying to slow the spread of the bugs. Dizzy Caballero shows us how.
Today we are working on removing some infested emerald ash borer trees.
The invasive beetle species that's behind killing more than 100 million ash trees along the East Coast and Midwest have been found in Forest Grove, Oregon.
The adult beetles feed on some of the foliage, and then they land on the bark of the tree, lay an egg, and then this is where the damaging life stage begins.
Dr. Max Ragazzino is with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. He says emerald ash borers were first detected in Washington County 2 years ago and have already killed over 200 trees.
The larva of the beetle feeds underneath the bark, and in doing so, it girdles the tree.
Now, local, state, and federal partners are trying a two-pronged approach to slowing the spread of the beetle, which means cutting down infected trees and chipping the wood to destroy the larvae. So, how do you determine if a tree's infected?
Some of the signs that you're looking for in an ash tree are canopy decline, dying branches.
But a big indicator is a crack in the bark with a D-shaped exit hole that's 3 millimeters across. And that tells you the tree is infested and too far gone to survive.
Can we measure this tree? Sure, yeah.
Leela and Allison are with the Oregon Department of Forestry.
Of this tree at about 4.5 feet off of the ground.
They're inspecting the ash trees in Cornelius in hopes of treating them before the invasive beetle moves in. And that's done by injecting pesticides directly into the tree.
What we saw over there in Forest Grove is the worst case scenario, but the good news is we have opportunity to make much better management decisions.
Allison's team will return in a few weeks to reassess the trees as they're not ready to be treated, in hopes of saving every single one.
I would personally recommend that almost all, if not every single one of these trees be treated.
Daisy Caballero, KGW News.
Always interesting to see solutions or what's being come up with to find the answers to problems like that. That's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow night, I have a look at a program in action that could offer a statewide solution to long wait times in jail for defendants with mental health concerns. We've exposed many of the issues this week. If you've been with us Monday through Wednesday tonight, we want to also spotlight an effort that seems to be helping on all levels. And as a personal note, I want to thank you for your comments that we've received this week, especially for the empathy that you've shown to a lot of families and their personal stories. It takes a lot of courage and fortitude for them to share with us and to share with you. So we appreciate that, and all sorts of methods and sources like YouTube or wherever else you watch to see that empathetic comments coming from you. Really appreciate it. Until then, tomorrow, have a great night, and we'll see you then.